Nice.
All right. Yeah. So the first thing I want to hear from you is really just like, I want to know, as I've known you for a long time and I know some of the backstory, but I don't really actually know the story of the origin story of this particular book. And I think I know pieces of it, but I'd love to just hear from you, like the whole. So um, here it is. Get the glare off of it. It's probably backwards because I don't know how to work Zoom right. Inklings on Philosophy and Worldview, a new way of learning about our connections to truth and reality. So yeah, give me the whole story. What's the big picture? How this book come to be?
Thanks for asking that. That's a fun story, fun to tell. And I think for me it goes back to, in college, I'm figuring out my worldview. I'm figuring out what I believe. I'm transitioning from knowing what I believe and how to believe it to having to step into really owning why. Why am I picking Jesus? Why am I picking Christianity? And after I left home, realizing there's a lot of other options out there, right? And then even getting into college and having professors um, challenge me on why I believe. I remember when I was at Oxford, an Oxford professor basically calling me a fool for actually believing this stuff. And I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't prepared.
Yeah.
Yeah. And and I think the other thing that I wasn't prepared for was how to navigate that with a gentleness and a respect and loving, being loving. Jesus says, they'll know you're my true disciples by your love, right? And in my mind, I was like, well, I have to prove that I'm right and prove that this guy is wrong. And I didn't have a framework of how to have a dialogue and a conversation. Um, and so, you know, that was a journey. It's part of why I'm here talking to you, Jack, is I'll
Yeah.
never forget that day. And that journey has brought me into developing a way to, with dignity, honor, and respect, um, and to keep things from universalism and pluralism and everybody's right. Like, no, getting to a place where I can confidently defend and say, this is what I believe, and this is why I'm believing it.
Mm.
And the likes of Chesterton and Lewis and Tolkien and others helped me do that in an intellectually sound way, which is really important. Um, but I remember First Peter 3:15 and First Peter, not First Peter saying, hello, but Peter saying, always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have. And like I said, I wasn't prepared. And I was looking at other people who were prepared. And generally, the way to do that was, well, you got to prove that they're wrong and stand on what you know is right. And I worked on that and built that in. And I was watching some others doing that. And I realized there's something off in just proving everybody else wrong.
Yeah.
I was breaking down relationships. I was disconnecting from people. I didn't feel like, I just felt awkward when someone would walk away like, yeah, I won the argument. All right. Like,
Yeah.
and I lost a friend, or a loved one even. So something was off there. And what where this comes from is coming back to my own school and realizing there's no philosophy class or worldview class at my school. And so I got permission to build a course using Lewis, Tolkien, and Chesterton. And one of the things I love about Chesterton is he modeled well, as did Lewis, but Chesterton in particular modeled well, brilliantly defending what he believed and why he believed it. But during even public debates, he would kind of laugh his way through it, and he was, firm but kind. He was what Peter actually says in the verse: always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. Chesterton had the reputation of, you know, winning a public debate and then taking the guy or the girl out afterwards and going to enjoy a dinner at a pub and laughing and talking and staying connected and having a relationship and being in conversation with people. I loved that. I love that concept. And so that's where originally this comes from, is wanting to offer a tool, a method, a way to be prepared to know not just what or how to believe, but why students, why I'm choosing Jesus as opposed to all these other options. And then, very importantly, gentleness and respect, honor and love. So 20 years later, here we are. And
it only took 20 years to figure out how to do that effectively.
there you go.
Yeah,
right?
that's not true. I've known you for a long time. You've been doing that all along, but that's great. So yeah, I think I heard, recently you said something along the lines of like, Jesus doesn't ask us to prove him to be true. He asks us to believe in him.
Yeah.
Is that I just think that's very interesting. You raised a question that I'll bring back at the end. So if we have a little time at the end, it might be interesting to think about this. But are you good sort of jumping into the book a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on the sort of reasons to be for this book, or like maybe?
Well, yeah, I have one or two other things that I'll throw in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm really passionate about is authentic discipleship, right?
Yeah.
So I think another reason, like, so that's a little bit like, where'd the book come from, right? But what's motivated me to persevere and to really figure out this worldview piece on why I believe, right? And what that is ultimately, Jesus calls us into discipleship, right? Following him, building his kingdom, spreading good news, right, to people. And like I said earlier, they'll know that we're Christians by our love. But I think one of the things that I found very quickly is that in order to be a disciple, you can't just like, okay, I'm just going to go do this. I think that's part of why it took 3 years for these guys following Jesus day in, day out, trying to, not just learn about Jesus, not just have a message to share about Jesus. The rabbinical method invites disciples into being like their rabbi, doing what their rabbi did. And I want to make that a lifestyle. I want that to not just be something I do one day a week or here and there. It's who I am and it's what I do. And what, John the Baptist says, repent. If you're going to repent, comes from changing your mind. Not just changing what you do, but changing your mind, and knowing that if you're willing to change your mind and change how you see things, that will impact your behavior. And I have found that in order for sustainable lifelong discipleship, if you don't have a worldview, a lens on how you're seeing the world that can handle following Jesus, that can handle really trying to step into doing what he did, not just talking about him, you won't last. You'll get the tensions of living out authentic discipleship are too great if you don't have a worldview that can handle miracles, signs and wonders, that can handle persecution, that can handle suffering, that can handle Jesus dying, and then resurrecting. How do you think if you don't have a worldview that can handle supernatural reality, and your leader is standing on a lake, well, then there's no way you're going to step out of a boat and try and do what he did. If, Jesus walks into a house and there's a dead 12-year-old girl, he says that she's napping. The people in the house they actually laugh at it. I love the next sentence. And then they were removed from the house, right? But they didn't have a worldview where for Jesus, he sees her sleeping, because what's death to Jesus? What's What's the lens when he sees the little girl? Well, yes, she's dead. It even says that I know she's dead, but really she's sleeping. And then he walks up, says a few words. She wakes up, jumps into her parents' arms. I can read that as a story. Okay. And I can trust in Jesus to save me and have faith that he'll save me by his grace. That's fantastic. Right. But if that were happening in my house, would I be the one mocking Jesus, or would I have a worldview that could handle it? Okay, you're saying she's napping, we'll call it a nap. And then I go upstairs with him and he resurrects my child. I want a worldview that can handle that kind of thing. Not just as I read it in a book, but 2,000 years later, here and now. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He said to go make disciples, right? That means that book of Acts, we're still in it and we're still trying. So that's another reason why this book exists, is I'm passionate about discipleship, and without the worldview that can handle authentic discipleship, it's going to be unsustainable as we navigate this world. Fair enough?
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, two questions to come out of that. I think, well, one, maybe it's a question and now just own it. So maybe I'll make a statement. Yeah. So the first question is that what you mean by authentic when you put that word at the front, is like, this is in there, and discipleship, this would be part of discipleship. Anything short of this doesn't really get at what Jesus was about. Is that kind of how you, or is that what you mean by authentic?
Yeah, I've wrestled with that word. And when we look at the passage, it says they'll know, not just they'll know that you're my disciples by your love. He actually uses the word true. You'll know, the world will know that you're my true disciples by your love, right? And so I don't like that word authentic, because it almost feels like, well, we're authentic and they're not. And that the last thing I want to do is create some type of elitism, right? Nor did Jesus. But there is a sense of like, are you really going to believe this and live it out? Well, in order to, I would even say they'll know you're my true disciples by your love. In order to really love like Jesus did, to really love others and to have a reputation of loving like Jesus, that's going to take a certain lens on how you view the world as well, how you view the other. He says to love enemies, right? If you don't have a worldview that can handle that, how are you going to love, right? How are we going to show someone our love? By speaking true identity. The woman caught in adultery, right? The religious leaders, are going to throw rocks on her. Like actual real rocks. They're going to kill her. She's caught in a sexual sin. They're going to kill her. Jesus's worldview, right? The way that the disciple, they'll know that we're our true disciples. Jesus uses words to get them to put the rocks down. Yeah, she's a sinner, but his worldview is like, yeah, and you guys are sinners as well. And then he turns to her and calls her daughter. Like the love that he is exuding, right, speaks identity. It stops the bullies. It's speaking life into her. I don't know. For me, that's all connected. Is that the way that we're going to be known for our love is going to come from our worldview. If we don't have the worldview, that I call them the Jesus goggles. If you don't have the Jesus goggles on and you're not seeing the world the way that he sees it, how will you be able to love the world the way that he loved the world? By feeding thousands of people who are hungry with one lunch. That's an act of love. But you're not going to, the disciples weren't even thinking. They were thinking, we got to get the money to buy the food. And God, Jesus, like, we're just going to give them the food this way, because his worldview allowed for a miracle to happen.
Yeah, all right. So you're really leaning into, and you like, that's a really great transition to actually get into the book. And I'll leave my statement for another time, because I think it's maybe a further down the road thing. But I do appreciate the idea that you're I mean, the question then is, if you're going to be a Christian and you're going to read that story
Yeah.
of a girl being raised from the dead, you either, I mean, it does, not to be binary, but you either have to go, okay, that's part of it, or you have to do something with that story. You have to relegate it. And that's, I mean, full disclosure, I probably lean towards some form of relegating that story to be something else. But what you're leading into is like, no, that's part of it. And if you're going to read it and say you believe it, then you kind of have to lean into that. So that's good. So that really does get to the book, right? So like, let's jump in. I think we talked about a little bit about your first sentence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this really correlates in some ways to what you just said. So I think it's a good time to pivot and think about, like, so the first sentence in the book, Matt, is a good one.